And the leaders
bad,
are human.
horrible. We've all done horrible things.
Right. We're not expecting the
humans.
leadership to be
Right.
perfect either.
Right. But as we can learn to value the good while still talking about and owning the bad, we really have the most power to change, to have that positive social change and become something better and learn and grow and do things differently in a way that helps more people.
Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider.
So welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma. For us, this is our first recording in the new year. For us.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It is. So happy New Year by the time our
That was
listeners...
applause, by the way, or it could have been frying bacon. I'm not sure.
Oh, is that what that... I just thought you were clearing your throat again.
Nope.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like you're needing to clear your throat. That's disgusting.
Whoa, wow. It's going to be a rough one today.
It's going to be a rough one today. So happy New Year to everybody. Our listeners are going to be hearing this probably the end of January, beginning of February, but that's just the way that these things go. So this is our first recording of 2023. I would say, other than having the flu so far, it's been a good new year. Mason, what do you think?
Can't complain.
Cannot
It's been
complain.
good, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited because we are getting our newsletter put together, and we are going to start sending out a newsletter. We're undecided yet if it's going to be a monthly thing or a quarterly thing, but we're working on that. So if you would like to be on the mailing list to get our newsletter, please head over to www.daisygirlcommunications.com. Click on the Contact Us and send us a note there, the Contact Us, and it'll put you on the list to receive the Daisy Girl Communications newsletter, and that will have information for Unpacking Mormonism. It'll also have the updates of Raising Crazy as well as Conversations with a Schizophrenic, which we ended season 1 and we will be starting season 2 again here in the near future. So we look forward to seeing you at our webpage. Alrighty, so today we wanted to talk about the good things Mormonism gave us. And I think that this is an important thing to do. It really kind of helps balance us out. I know that when I'm working with clients, I utilize dialectical behavioral therapy, and one of the therapeutic skills that we learn there is the radical acceptance, which is accepting the reality of the situation for what it is. And we should probably do a little bit more exploration into radical acceptance and the value that it has for us at a future episode. But one of the things that I work with my clients on is identifying the good things that came from difficult situations. And not all traumatic environments are 100% bad. Having said that, they're not 100% good either. Now, there are some really terrible things out there, and I do not at all want to minimize or devalue the depth of pain when traumatic things occur. Not at all. But I also want to make sure that we can teach skills. One of the benefits of coming up with the good things that we gained from certain difficult situations or toxic environments or so on and so forth is that we can kind of come up for air and identify how we've become stronger, or the things that we've learned, friendships we've gained, those types of things, even though the system may have failed or the environment or traumatic issue has failed us in some way.
For me, I tend to be a pretty positive person, and so to be able to take the time, and this might be very timely for me as well, as I'll describe here in a little bit, but to take the time to reflect on something that has recently become a very negative impact on my life and be able to look back and still see some of the positive things, some of the way that it has affected my life in a positive way is I imagine very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So our intent today is to help our listeners identify that rarely is a situation all bad. And when it comes to religious systems, there's usually quite a bit of good that's going on. And I would say that most of the people that I have the opportunity to talk to who are leaving high demand religious systems or toxic communities and environments, they'll say, oh, but the people are so good. And I hear that an awful lot, that within Mormonism, we've got this system. And I would say, for me, toxic leadership that really failed at being honest or explaining things in a way that satisfied really difficult questions that I felt were very fair to ask. I would say for me in Mormonism, I'm going to echo and agree with RFM, who, when he did his Mormon Stories episode, and then again on Mormonism Live, I've heard him say that, he felt like he kind of outgrew Mormonism. And I'm going to say that that's absolutely true for me, that it served a very good purpose for me during a lot of my developmental years. Definitely during our time in the military, which we'll talk about later on in the podcast, that there were definitely some advantages and some life skills that I learned and developed from Mormonism. And that over the years, I just kind of outgrew it, that it just stopped working for me, that the mythology was not helpful anymore, and that I found greater peace, happiness, and unconditional love and acceptance outside of that system rather than inside of the system. But it would be ungrateful, I think, and very much amiss if I did not acknowledge some of the good things in my life that came directly from Mormonism. Having said that, I want to say that none of the things that we're going to talk about today are exclusive to Mormonism. You can find all of these things in other systems, but for us, because Mormonism was the system that we both grew up in, it is where we learned many of these life skills.
Yeah, there's a quote that you have in your office that I've appreciated. I haven't always agreed with, but I've appreciated the simplicity of it, and I'm not sure I completely agree with it now, but I find it apropos. And what it says is, what is good about Mormonism isn't unique, and what is unique about Mormonism isn't good. And I think just recognizing that, even though we might have found the things that we're going to talk about today, we might have found those in other organizations or other situations as well. They might have just come from our families, like they do for a lot of people if we hadn't been involved in Mormonism. Be that here, whatever, in our lives, we can recognize that they did come from being a part of that organization, being part of a family that was part of that organization, and we can gain some benefit from that.
Yeah. Does it say in my office where that quote came from?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm looking at it.
Is that like it's on like a sticky note in on my desk, right? Yeah. So I'm going to say that I probably jotted down that thought while listening to another podcast, most likely Mormon Stories or Mormonism Live, as those are the two that I listen to.
Right.
Probably the most often.
I think it might have come from you. I don't remember if somebody else said it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to take credit for it because I don't remember if that was my own thought or if I was writing down a statement made by somebody else. So I'm definitely not going to take credit for that. I want to say my memory is I heard something similar on Mormonism Live, on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn, but I would not be able to tell you where from. It was just as I was listening, got that thought, wrote it down, or heard it and directly wrote down what they had said. So total squirrel.
Okay. I'm opening up my computer because I try and keep track of the notes and stuff that needs to go in the show notes while we're going. And I finally got it open and got to the page where I can click on the show notes from our Dropbox. And it's almost off the page. There's enough files in there for Unpacking Mormonism that now I can't see it first thing. Aw, that's a good thing.
Yay! We're growing. We're definitely growing. Okay.
So why don't you go ahead and talk about your first thing?
All right. So, yeah, Mason and I, we came up with 3 each, and then we found one that was similar. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my first thing. I would say that one of the good things that I gained from Mormonism is my work ethic. For anybody who's been a part of Mormonism, if you are anxiously engaged in Mormonism, you are busy. And I want to say that, this also, a lot of this came from my dad. I watched my dad, again, my dad is not all bad, not at all.
Right, nobody is.
Nobody is. Well, very few people are.
Right. Almost nobody is.
Nobody is.
Maybe there's some people out there that are all bad, but.
Right. So anyway, but I learned how to do my best in the projects that I was engaging in, or the positions or the callings that I was assigned to do. And that as I did my best, as I followed through on the commitments that I had made, that other people would learn how to depend on me, that I could learn to depend on me, but also that I would feel good about the things that I was active in.
There's a lot of healthy things that come from being not just busy, but being actively busy and accomplishing things in your busyness.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of plays out. So I was a flute player. I played the flute, so I was a flautist. And I started playing the flute the summer after my 4th grade year of school. That was when in Snowflake Independent School District, that was when we started learning how to play music. So it would have been 5th grade or the summer before, and then 5th grade. And I remember walking across the intermediate school campus. We would cross the street to the high school performing arts building, and we would play. And I remember, so for my parents, they said, if you're going to do this, you need to learn how to do it correctly. And I don't know if it was my parents or my grandparents who ended up paying for private lessons for me, but from a very young age when I started, I had private flute lessons. It did not take me very long to sit first chair in my schooling. And then once I got to be the first chair and I got that positive attention and, wow, you sit first chair, I was, determined.
No competitiveness in you at all,
goodness.
right?
I'm going to tell you right now, y'all, Lees are competitive people. So at least in my family of origin, we were incredibly competitive. And there was a lot of good that came from that, but also a lot of bad that came from that. But in this case, because I was not willing to lose my spot as first chair, I practiced very hard. And I utilized the skills that were available to me at that time to continue to play my musical instrument. And I would say, I graduated from high school. Music helped pay for college for me, that I was able to get scholarships and whatnot to play. I say whatnot an awful lot, and I never noticed that till I started podcasting. But then also that played into other aspects of my life. I remember being young, it's on Fast and Testimony meeting in Mormonism. So the first Sunday of the month is usually Fast and Testimony meeting. And that is basically open mic for Mormonism, where you can get up and bear your belief from the pulpit of the truthfulness of Mormonism, or, we say the gospel. And I remember the little kids' testimonies went something along the lines of, I'd like to bear my testimony. Okay, trigger warning. I'd like to bear my testimony. I know the church is true. I love my mom and dad. I know that Joseph Smith is a true prophet. I know, insert most recent prophet. So for me, it was Gordon B. Hinckley is a true prophet in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And so it's very repetitive, it's rote. Is that the word I'm looking for, Mason?
Yeah, I think so.
For little kids. And I would say I grew up in the Book of Mormon. I'm calling it the Book of Mormon suspender, because if you take our country, you have the Bible belt. And then over here, you've got the Book of Mormon suspender. I think it's great. Okay, Mason, that was not nearly enough laughter at my joke. So it's the Book of Mormon suspenders. So we're talking about, Idaho, Western Washington, Utah,
Right.
parts of Nevada, Arizona, parts of Northern California, all the way down. So I'm going to call that the Mormon suspender, the Book of Mormon suspender. So anyway, within that, oh my goodness, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, so within that Mormon suspender, you could go to pretty much any sacrament meeting and you would hear the little children's testimony basically being that same repetitive statement, which looking back on that, I'm like, that looks an awful lot like indoctrination, especially since you would watch, the little kid get up and the mom or the dad would whisper the things into their ear, and then the little kid would go down, and then the mom or dad would be like, the only reason I came up is because my kid wanted me to come up, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is what it looked like an awful lot growing up. But I remember my dad said, absolutely not. You guys are not allowed to get up and say the same thing that every other kid gets up and says. It's not personal. It's not appropriate. It's, what is it? They call it, is it rameumptum, where you get up and you say things, you're just getting attention. If you're going to bear testimony from the pulpit, you need to have something unique to say. It needs to be personal, and it cannot be copying everybody else.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
And so for a while in my youth, we were not allowed to bear our testimonies from the pulpit unless we had prepared a testimony and it had gotten approval from my parents as being an appropriate testimony to bear. As such, we also learned about public speaking, and that getting up in front of people and being prepared with something and speaking from the heart was very important. And I would say that again came from my dad. So my dad absolutely loved writing. He self-published a couple of books growing up. But I remember that for him, there had to be reason or cause. You were not supposed to just get up and do it because that's what was expected. It needed to be personable. It needed to be valued. And I have to kind of chuckle because my little sister, the one so she would be the third in line, definitely took this to heart. And we got to the point where when she would get up to bear her testimony, all of us would kind of shrink in our pews because we all wished she would go back to the rote stuff because, oh my goodness, the things she would say from the pulpit almost every fast and testimony meeting. And I think my parents finally were like, you may not. So I name her Evelyn in my book, so I'll call her Evelyn now. But it was like, Ev, you cannot bear your testimony anymore. You are oversharing from the pulpit as well. So, but yeah, it was that we needed to put our best foot forward. The other thing, again, that I learned from my dad was that you don't jimmy rig, you don't placate, you don't jerry rig, I guess is how most people, so I called it jimmy rigging growing up, but I know that in other parts of the country they call it jerry rigging. But that you...
Other parts of the country they call it something a lot worse.
Yeah, okay. So I would say that growing up, my dad very much put the thought into us that if we were going to fix something or do something, we were to do it correctly. And that played out in my church upbringing in the sense of when I was called as like the young women's advisor or in one of our young women, so I'm talking about when I was a youth and I was within the class presidency. I never served as a class president. That was always given to somebody else. But when I was the counselor or the secretary, I learned very young that I was expected at home to show up, fulfill that calling, put my best foot forward, do things correctly, work hard, and make it so that people could depend on me. And I feel that within Mormonism, I was able to take this lesson coming from my family, and I got to practice it a lot. And then there, again, that level of competition, there was also this, not only are you going to do your best, but you're going to also do it better than anybody else has done it before you. Now, again, Lees are very competitive, and I definitely struggled, and sometimes still do struggle with mine is better than yours. Look at this effort I'm putting into it.
Yeah, well, and nothing we're going to talk about today, like you said, is unique to Mormonism, and everything we're going to talk about today has its toxic pieces as well. Like, you can go from the value of hard work and trying to be the best, very smoothly you slide into toxic perfectionism,
right?
And I have to be the best or I can't function. So, yeah.
Well, and in my upbringing, it was more, I'm doing it better than you, therefore I'm more righteous than you. So it wasn't like when I was playing the flute, it wasn't, I have been blessed with this skill and this opportunity to learn at the hands of a very talented private teacher. And I ended up having 2 different private flute teachers. And learning and gaining this skill that I loved doing. But it was, I'm better than you because I practice more than you. I'm working harder than you, therefore I'm better than you. So in my home of origin, there was very much the one-upping to elevate ourselves and cut down somebody else. And so in my adult years, I've had to work really hard to get rid of that piece where my skill level isn't, so that my level of expertise or skill in something does not devalue those who do not share that same skill set. And then to value where somebody else's strength is, wonderful. It was kind of like that. I had to do the best at everything in order to feel valued. So yes, I definitely had some of that toxic perfectionism and also that holier than thou, I'm more righteous attitude that came from that. But again, going back, when we would do service projects, it was very important to my parents that we were the first to arrive, last to leave, make sure things were cleaned up and put away appropriately. If we were doing garden work or lawn work as a service project, I was expected to make sure that all of it was done correctly, that just because it was something I was doing for free for somebody else did not mean it was okay to do less effort, that whether I was getting paid or providing it as a free service, I was expected to perform at my best always. And that has really served me well. I think especially as a businesswoman, when I opened my private practice, I was very, very intent on doing my best and putting my best foot forward for all of my clients. And one of the things I learned in college was how to measure your own success as a personal feedback for, am I providing helpful services? And so I started to do that. I started to do basically quality control research on myself and learning how to be very honest with myself for where my shortcomings were, and then seeking out instruction on how to do better in that area. That absolutely came from my home environment, and it was something that I was able to exercise and practice within our church service. So that's my first one.
Well, and you know what? I don't think anybody will argue the value of hard work. We can talk about the fact that, yes, it can lead to toxic things. Yes, it can have some very unhealthy aspects to it, but the value of hard work in and of itself is incredibly important. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's a very good thing that comes from Mormonism and comes from a lot of different things, but something that we learned at least related to Mormonism. So yeah, I feel like I got the same thing. Maybe not in the same way. I certainly didn't get a lot of the same lessons that you're talking about, but I learned to work hard too.
Well, I would say when you were on your mission, for you, when it came to church stuff, you definitely best foot forward, did your best, followed the rules. Like for you, I would say your work ethic really came down to I am able to follow orders, do it the best way I know how within the area of expertise, where you may not have gotten the same, learn how to, what's the word I'm looking for? My brain is so tired, Mason. We probably shouldn't be recording today. No, so like where I got I'm going to go out and do the research and figure out how to do this the best. For you, I felt like it was, this is a skill I already have, and I will give this what I already have and not hold back in any aspect that it's asked of me.
That's at least somewhat true.
Okay.
Yeah. So my first one, was there anything else you wanted to say about that?
No.
So my first one really comes down to positivity. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I try and see things from the positive outlook, maybe even to a fault. like a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, there is a fault lying on these things as well. But I think there's a lot of value in just being positive. We live in a tough world. And everybody has their own degree of toughness. Some of us have gone through some really crazy stuff that it's incredible that we're even asked to go through it. And others of us, we all have trials along the way. And for me, learning that, and I don't even know where this came from. Like I couldn't, like you're giving examples of, how your dad taught taught hard work and just doing things well. I'm not even sure where this came from. I think I have inklings of the fact that, like in the Book of Mormon, it says that men are that they might have joy, and that kind of thing. Just there's a lot of talk in General Conference and from prophets about how you put your shoulder to the wheel. It's not as much. Some of that's related to hard work, but I think for me, a lot of it is related to the perspective of how we approach it. And for me, being positive is incredibly important and increases my health. If I get down, if I feel negative, and anyone who struggled with depression has probably felt this way too. For me, if I can stay positive, I feel healthier, I feel happier. The trials don't necessarily go away. They don't disappear any faster, but my mind stays healthier and more able to engage in the process of overcoming. Yeah.
I remember when Jeffrey R. Holland gave the talk on depression, and he said something along the lines of, squaring your shoulders and driving forward, and, almost that like fake it till you make it. And then he said, sometimes you can't do that. But I remember that really resonating for you, and for you saying, yeah, you know what, I can find the goodness and the happiness and be kind of that incurable optimist, even when life is throwing me a lot of shit. And you've done that very well.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, though, is sometimes we use that fake smile and that happy, that, just be happy to minimize and not see people's pain. I think that's really that toxic side of that is, no, don't be sad. Let's just look at the good side.
Have to be positive.
Look at the positive in this, and we really end up minimizing and erasing challenge. It stops us. It can stop us from experiencing uncomfortable emotional states, which are just as valuable as comfortable emotional states.
Yeah, and as you well know, I'm going to sit here and say that's absolutely what did happen. Not all the time, of course, but on occasion, in a lot of situations, I wasn't able to just feel the emotions of a difficult situation, in particular with someone else. There's always this, okay, yeah, this happened. What do we do now? And I still struggle with that a lot, because sometimes that is a very good way to approach things, and other times it just can't be done that way. And as you said, the quote from Jeffrey R. Holland, it did strike me enough that I can still tell you what he said. And you basically said it, but he said that there are some situations where square shoulders and a positive attitude are not going, or the power of positive thinking, something like that, are not going to be enough to get you through. Although I am a huge advocate of squared shoulders and positive thinking.
Right. We better put that in the show notes and make sure
Yeah, I'll have to find that
give the
one.
credit to that. Yeah.
But yeah, so just the idea that if I square my shoulders and I keep myself upbeat, I'm going to be better able to get through this. And it has caused me to not be able to just stop and feel with someone. Now I'm a huge advocate, although I'm still not very good at it. I'm a huge advocate of stopping and just feeling with someone. You know, Brene Brown describes compassion as walking into the dark and just sitting with someone in their pain. And I'm getting better at that. But until a few years ago, I didn't even realize that was a thing. Like it was always, no, you go into the dark maybe, but you grab them and you immediately pull them into light and you get them into a better place. And while my hope still is, if I sit with you, that I can help you get back into the light, I have to be able to just sit with you first.
Right.
And so that was a hard thing to learn. But the positivity has been a huge boon in my life. And you said something about putting on that fake smile. I don't feel like I put on a fake smile.
Right.
Not very much at all.
No,
for me, it is very much a real smile, but it does sometimes hide other things that maybe I'm not ready to focus on.
Right. I would say that I agree with you. For you, I feel like your happiness and your optimism has almost always come from a very genuine place. But I know that a lot of other people feel like I have to be happy in order to fit in.
Yes.
Or to feel accepted. And so their level of happiness is not necessarily fake, but it's a mask. It's covering up some other very real emotions. Yeah. You know, I remember when you first did your answering machine, something about how you've reached Mason. If you're smiling, leave a message. If you're not smiling, start smiling and leave a message. And how sometimes I was like, oh, that's really cute. And other times I was like, you know what, Mason, F you. We need to talk about some hard stuff. And so, you know, from a mental health perspective, we now understand, based on, you know, decades of research, that learning how to lean in and sit with those uncomfortable emotions, learning how to talk about it and feel it and identify when it's there and recognize that it's not Satan, it's not some evil force, but rather information and the natural response of our body, that when we give voice to those uncomfortable, darker emotions, that they heal and we can actually get back to a place of, in my field, we call it homeostasis, or emotional balance, that we are supposed to feel the positive and the negative. So yeah, I think that when you look at Mormons, for the most part, you're going to see a lot of quote unquote happy people. But in my experience, I see people who really struggle with how to work through and face the difficult, uncomfortable, darker, harder emotional experiences that happen. And I think that there are hundreds of examples all around us where they just have not had the opportunity to develop those skills.
Yeah, well, we talked about that a little bit in a recent episode with Wendy Jensen, right? Mm-hmm. That just that emotional immaturity, because walking into a sacrament meeting, you walk in sad, either you're going to get all kinds of attention you don't necessarily want, or people are going to avoid you because they're not ready to talk about anything sad. But oftentimes it's all very surface deep. Now we hopefully all had those friends where it's absolutely not surface deep. But as an organization in general, I feel like it's usually surface deep. There's no room for us to talk about the negative things. We need to just put our shoulder to the wheel. You know, we need to push along and just drive on, and it'll go.
Well, I would say there's a sense of, I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you.
I think that I was done. So go ahead.
So I think that in the church, there's the sense of glorifying struggle. Like if you're struggling, that means that either it's very polarized. It means either you're sinning and you need to repent, or you're doing such a good job that Satan is having to work so much harder against you.
Yes.
I think that when we just remove Satan from the equation, I remember before I left the church, I posted something on Facebook about we sure give Satan an awful lot of credit for just normal life things. And I got like several hundred likes and I don't know, I want to say like 300 comments. Like it was a very active, if not my most active Facebook post ever. And then I left the church and crickets. But very controversial. But when we take, for me, like I said in the beginning, I feel like I kind of outgrew the mythology. I personally do not believe that there is a devil or a Satan or some, evil spirit out there trying to tear us down. I think that life does that good enough on its own, just the normal life challenges. But I definitely feel very strongly in my professional world that negative emotions are natural and healthy and need to be voiced, but not in that big system. Like, I don't encourage people to walk into sacrament meeting showing how sad they are or how hard they have things, because that doesn't feel good. But rather, when you have somebody that you trust, that you feel close with, that with that individual, that you have, that we talk about confession, and I'm trying to remember if it was Brene Brown or somebody else. Goodness, I'm going to butcher this. I'm going to have to find it and talk about it later, or talk about it at another post. But that is, the power of confession is very healing. But in order for the confession to work, you have to have confidentiality. Like, if I'm coming to somebody and saying this happened and this is what I'm feeling, you have to be able to trust implicitly the person that you're sharing that with, to keep their mouth closed and to honor that dark space in order for you to heal and come out of it, which is why confidentiality in my field is paramount to my success. If I'm talking about people's darkness and their struggles and others are able to identify them, that's a huge breach of confidentiality. That is not okay. And so I remember, Mason, when I was physically and mentally out, so a PMO Mormon at the time, as they like to call that. I remember talking to you that one of the issues I had with church discipline is that we have learned that the power of confession, like in the research, and I want to say it's the Gottmans, but I don't remember enough to cite them. I am going to have to go back in and look. It may be, why won't you buy it? Anyway, one of my continued education things, we learned about the power of confession, or talking about the things that you've done that went against your own moral code, and that you would need to apologize for those things and confess them to somebody. But the issue in Mormonism is that it's never actually confidential. Because if I go to my bishop and I confess some quote unquote sin or, thing that I've done, some action I've done that's harmed the people around me, the ward council is going to know at least enough, because there has to go out, that person's not allowed to pray, or that person's not allowed to hold a calling. Or there's some breach of confidentiality, and they say it's confidential, but it's really not.
Right. At least it can be, if it's going to affect your quote-unquote worthiness in the church. Then
your status of membership.
It becomes a little less confidential. It's not like anyone will know exactly what you did, but they still know something happened, something of a serious nature happened, serious according to the church standards.
Which, from a psychological standpoint, impedes healing. The fact that anybody else that you have not chosen to specifically know about it suddenly knows, it impedes your ability to heal from that. And so I would say, I love that you have learned the power of positivity in your Mormon upbringing, but also recognize the limits of, I learned the power of positivity, but I did not learn what to do with the negative or the hard or the dark emotions, which really stunted your growth and ability to connect with people in a meaningful way that allowed for that connection you get as you go through hardship together, what we call that trauma bonding. So bonding in a time of trauma. So you and I both experienced, so I'll bring up like the loss of our twins. When we lost our twins, I was in the depths of depression. You didn't know how to reach me. And I would say a lot of that was because you never learned in the church how to reach out and truly feel with somebody who was grieving, because there was always they're in a better place. Oh, this is God's plan.
There was always an answer.
Stop. Right. It was, don't go into that dark place because then Satan's going to have power over you. Stay up here where it's positive. Don't go there. God's got it under control. And so we kind of...
That was God's will.
Right. We call that spiritual bypassing, which is I'm not going to address the difficult things in favor of that positive outlook on life. So again, that balance. But yes, I feel like you've always been very genuine in your positivity.
Thank you. There was one other thing I was going to add to these too, is that there's actually a precedent for these kinds of things. And thus far, with the work ethic and with positivity, I feel like they're not exclusive to Mormonism at all, of course. That makes sense. But like the value of hard work in the New Testament, Jesus says, be ye therefore perfect. Well, it implies that that's going to take a lot of effort, right? And then when it comes to the power of positivity, I remember something in the New Testament where the Savior is talking, and I think it's in the both of these statements are actually in the Sermon on the Mount. But he says, therefore, when you fast, wear not a long face. You know, the idea being, I'm going through something hard right now, but I don't need to tell the world about it.
Unless it's fast and testimony meeting.
Sure. But that kind of precedent, that idea that my difficulties don't need to be shared with everyone. And I don't necessarily think that that's even what Jesus meant, but I think that is a message that is received from that statement as well. So just showing that there's precedent there for these things, and we learned them from somebody, from something, and sometimes it is from religion, from scripture, from parents who were taught the same thing or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anything else on those two?
No.
Well, then let's talk about your second one, yeah.
So the next one that I have here is within Mormonism, they value serving others. And so I learned a desire to serve and help those who are less fortunate, and also to work in a way that we are making the world a better place. Or when I went through my master's program, Walden University talked all the time about creating positive social change, that our goal as providers and academics was to make the world a better place. And so that really started for me in Mormonism. I remember that, and I think it was always important. We grew up poor, both Mason and I. We grew up not in the depths of poverty, but both of our dads were teachers for a living. So neither of our families had a lot of money. And so I feel like growing up in the church as somebody who didn't have a lot, we were able to give what we had and do so in a way that did not elevate us amongst others. And I really appreciated that we would, be able to get in and really help people, and also to do things that created positive social change. Again, back to that public speaking thing, I've always been a very outspoken person. And if you look at my life history, one of the things that my parents would talk about when I was very, very young is that I tended to collect the misfits and befriend the misfits. And that if somebody...
What does that say about me?
You're a misfit. And that... I'm just teasing you. But that I also always had a love for advocating for those who could not speak for themselves. And I would say that, yes, that is definitely a part of my character, that I'm very passionate about advocating and making the world a better place, and being kind and genuine in that kindness rather than placating in that kindness. And that was definitely a characteristic that was able to be nurtured and grown out well in my church community. So, yeah.
Just for the record, I might be a misfit, but I'm pretty sure in this scenario, I collected you, not the other way around.
Did you collect me?
I think so.
Yeah, you definitely in our relationship, you are definitely correct. You pursued me long before I was interested in pursuing you. However, having said that, when you and I met, I was an angry, bitter, hurting person.
Yeah.
I was not in my place of advocating for the less fortunate, because I was at that point, I had been broken.
Right,
So
you felt
for
like
more
the less
information,
fortunate, yeah.
read my upcoming book, which just went back to the publisher for fact checking. Sheesh.
Well, and I will
Such
add,
a long process. Go ahead.
With the positive change, making the world a better place. Again, the precedent, actually from the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to just stick with this one.
All right, Jesus, let's go.
Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. That kind of thing. But also near the end of the book of Matthew, when he says, when the Lord comes, he'll say, you people come stand on my right, because when you saw someone hungry, you fed them. When you saw someone thirsty, you gave them drink. The idea that, and of course, these people didn't recognize that they were serving the Savior. They were just trying to make the world a better place. And I think that that's a powerful piece, whether it's Christian or it's simply something that many of us desire to do from the innermost parts of our hearts. It is something that makes the world a better place. And it's something that makes us better along the way. That service increases who we are, at least when it is done strictly out of a desire to help people.
Yeah, I would say that for me, as I was in the right mindset while providing service, because there's absolutely times where I have not been in the right mind service and have served with a great deal of resentment and bleh, we all have that. But during those times that I was able to truly serve in what I would say, quote unquote, the Lord's way, or with the intent to help better somebody else's life, what I gained was the increased capacity to love somebody fully for who they were, where they were at that time in life without judgment. And so for me, that was a very good thing. Yeah. I also find it very interesting that one of the things that I gained from the church that was taught to me from the time I was itty bitty, it's almost forget yourself and go to work. Serving to the point of burning out. Like it was, you serve until you can't stand anymore type thing. There's almost that toxicity in service. I find it very interesting that is one of the things that led me out of the church. And my personal experience is that the people were amazing at serving. And I would say for the most part, the people I saw serve were doing so with wholesome intention and a desire to better other people's lives, even though sometimes that service was given in ways that were a little offensive or causing harm. Like we don't do a very good job of, again, getting into the dark places with people to really be able to identify what they need and what type of service would be helpful. But we are amazing at yard work. We're amazing at crisis response after natural disasters.
Absolutely.
And we're amazing at food. Like Mormons can bring you casseroles until like the world ends type of a thing. We do that very, very well.
That's almost part of the bad as well.
Well, because we're not connecting with that darker place.
Yeah.
But for me, it was the people are doing this well, and I'm watching people burn out left and right, and serving until it's become unhealthy. But the system, the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints having, close to $200 billion sitting in funds and not utilizing that to do things like bring clean water to impoverished areas or working in a way that we can teach people to sustain their own life. The fact that, the bishop storehouse orders was micromanaged to the nth degree. And so therefore, in my opinion, delivered in a way that was very humiliating at times for the receiver, that was actually something that led me out. That, you know, what I had been taught from the time I was little was serve without judgment. But then the way that the system was creating service opportunities was absolutely full of judgment.
Yeah.
And I don't think I saw just how toxic that judgment was until I started communicating with several bishops who were paying for services. So I would have a client come in and the bishops were paying me as the third party reimbursement because there wasn't insurance or they couldn't afford their copays or, you know,
right.
so on and so forth. And so the church would help. And it was very interesting to me to see the bishop roulette. I had some bishops that were like, you don't need to talk to me. I trust you to practice
right.
ethically. I'll pay until you release the client from treatment. And so there were some times where I would have, you know, certain clients in treatment for 18 months and the church paid for it. And from the bishop, no questions asked, versus other bishops that were like, no, this person isn't doing anything to take care of themselves. And I'd be like, well, yeah, there's a lot of trauma and other things
right.
going on. We're going to need probably 4 to 6 months to really get to a place where you start to actually see the fruits of what we're doing here. And they'd be like, no, you got to fix it in 3 sessions. And so that was really my eyes opening and going, I feel like I do the best job that I know how to do as a provider. 3 sessions to fix significant trauma, impossible. Like, it's not, that is not an appropriate time frame, at least not with the skills and the tools and the research that we have at our disposal now. And then it was later on seeing some of the other things and hearing other people's stories about how service had been administered as being very dehumanizing, really started to shift my perspective.
Well, the irony that I just thought of is that even the bishop, say that person came in for adultery, the bishop wouldn't take 3 sessions to work them through that. Like, if they got disfellowshipped, it would be a year-long process or something like that. So it's unrealistic expectations on their part.
Well, and most of the times that the bishops were cutting things off was when there was significant domestic violence going on in the home. And it was expecting the woman to, well, she needs to go to work. And I'd be like, well, she can't, because then she's leaving her homeschooled children with her abusive husband. Right. Well, then she needs to enroll her kids in school. Well, she can't. He won't let her. Well, then they need to this. Well, if they're not going to fix this, I'm not going to pay for the services. And I'm like, victims of domestic violence need a hell of a lot more support than 3 sessions and us saying, you know what? If you want to stop getting beat up, you need to A, B, and C. And that was really difficult for me. That was the first experience where I literally wanted to cuss out a bishop and didn't because of the professional experience. But that bishop, and I've had some bishops like that where it's like, well, you know, they're obviously disabled and it's, well, they need to do more. And I'm like, but are you actually checking in with them to see what they are doing and that they are working to the best of their capacity? Today, that judgment just really and the fact that when you get ordained to be a bishop, Mason, you can vouch for this, you are ordained to be a judge in Israel. Mm-hmm. And a lot of bishops are very comfortable. But again, most of the bishops I worked with were very generous and loving, well-intentioned. And I would say even most of the bishops came to me and said, okay, you know, Sister Westbrook or Sarah, how can we help with this? And, you know, with client permission, I was able to train bishops on how to respond a little bit differently to, for the most part, very good results. But
yeah, well,
I do find it interesting that one of the greatest things I learned from the church is also one of the reasons I left. It was they were not practicing what they preached, and that really bothered me.
Well, and we're getting to the point where we're spending more time focusing on the negative things, and we probably need to fix that. Both you and I are, because those are the things, the hard things that we come here to this podcast to talk about.
But I also don't want to silence the negative.
No, neither do I. And I don't think that we haven't said anything that I think is inappropriate. But I do want to try and stay with the point of this was to talk about the good things. I will add that there's a precedent to that exhausting yourself too, right? There, again, Jesus said, "He who seeks to find himself must lose himself, and he who seeks to lose himself will find himself." That idea that you have to basically give all of yourself if you want to figure out who you are. And I'm, again, not sure that's really what he meant, but it is absolutely taken that way a lot. So yeah, there's some negative in service as well, but one of the benefits that we learned was to be able to just serve, to be able to serve with compassion and seek to, I don't think we were really taught how to actually figure out what someone needs, but to try and serve them in a way that we are meeting their needs.
And I would say for me, what I gained out of these lessons from Mormonism was I learned how to love without judgment those who are less fortunate or living their life in a way that I didn't necessarily understand, that I could love them and accept where they were at, who they were at, without any judgment. I didn't need to understand or agree with their lifestyle choices to love them unconditionally.
Right.
You know, it was an amazing experience the first time I could just completely, so, you know, growing up, I was earlier very naive about addiction, specifically drug and alcoholism.
A lot of us are.
And how I was able to just love somebody. And while I disagreed with their choices around alcohol use, and I could see that it was harming them, to be able to step into the world of, that's a demon I'm not equipped to help them fix, but that doesn't change how I'm going to love and serve them at all. And then going in through my master's program, and now I have the skills and tools to help somebody work through some of the demons of addiction. It's been a wonderful journey for me, and I definitely gained that through learning how to serve within Mormonism.
Yeah, and I think that the easy thing, I think it's probably easier to learn the skills to help someone than it is to learn to unconditionally love someone. And so I love that is where you were able to start, and I think that that's a terrific thing. So,
all right, so Mason,
all
what's
right,
yours?
So my second one, number 4 for us, is strong values. We've talked about this a lot, and I don't really want to go into this a whole lot. I actually wanted to preface this with a little bit of a story. I reached out to a friend that I had talked to a few days ago, who reached out to us through the Daisy Girl Communications.
Right, a friend that we haven't spoken to
website. We haven't seen them in a
since-
while.
Goodness, since before you joined the military. It's been
Yeah.
over 20 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I see them on Facebook and I, follow their lives like we do these days. But he reached out and sent us a very wonderful email just talking about how much he's gained and how much he appreciates what we're doing here. And so I talked to him for a while after that as well. But I reached out to him and his wife this morning because I knew we were going to do this podcast, and I'm kind of, over the last several days, been thinking about what are the good things from the church, and I'm kind of in an angry place. It's been hard for me to be able to focus on the good things, and so he was able to help me with some things, and I just wanted to kind of share because maybe just because I need to be a little vulnerable with that. I've struggled with this topic, interestingly enough, because positivity is what I focus on. It's been hard for me, and I'm working through it. But I just I think it's okay for us to be angry and to not be able to see the good things sometimes. Part of why we're doing this is because a lot of our listeners are probably in that place, or certainly have been, where they've just been angry and it's hard to see the positive things. So the next one is strong values.
Well, and I want to say something about values. What you're talking about is personal morals and values and standards so that you can live your life the way you feel happiest. And so the values and standards, this does not necessarily mean aligning with everything the church says, but rather you learned how to develop high moral standards to live your life by. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I think some of those values were just incorporated into my life because they were part of the doctrine of the church, and I'm certain that other people have that experience too, regardless of what religion or organization you belong to. It has been a little bit difficult to kind of weed out what my actual values are, unrelated to the church, but nonetheless, many of the things that I hold dear, like honesty, hard work, some of the things we're talking about today, have a foundation in what I learned in primary and young men's and
Right.
on a mission and in priesthood service and those kinds of things.
Well, and I would say that that's normal. That's kind of like while our children are small, we teach them our personal morals and values, or our family morals and values and standards. And as they grow into adulthood, they will shift and adjust those to fit their own lifestyle.
I think we have to.
Absolutely. And I think that's healthy.
Right. I didn't really try to do that, I think, until all of this stuff with the church and you leaving the church and now the podcast and stuff. But I think it's healthy. It's healthy for us to look and go, okay, this is everything that I got taught. What if this actually matters to me? I think it's a healthy way to be. So,
Well, and I would say things like, you have a high moral standard of showing up and supporting your children, the standards and values surrounding family being important. The value and standard of honesty, the value and standard of being generous, the value and standard of, abstaining from addictive substances in a manner that would harm those around you, or, managing those substances. I think, where you may have been alcohol is evil before, today you can see the benefit of social alcohol use and within limits and those types of things.
Mostly I see the benefit in my life of not judging people for the choices they're making.
There you go.
Which is also helpful, and that's growth as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's about all I really wanted to say on that. Just that's one of those things. So how about we talk about your next one?
Did you want to talk at all about why you're angry, or are you going to save that for later?
I don't think I really do want to talk about why I'm angry right now. I'd like to focus on just the positive things we're here to talk about.
Okay, awesome. So for me, this one kind of is a funny story. Well, not funny, but, kind of funny. Anyway, we bought a new stove recently, and we have propane at our house, and so we decided to go back. So we had an electric stove, and then we replaced it, and we put a propane stove back in. So when we first bought the house, we had a propane stove, and we had to get rid of it because there were some propane leaks going on, and I went to an electric one. Well, I taught Brig how to cook on that electric stove, and so as Brig moved into his own place, we bought a new stove for our house and gave Brig the stove that he already knows how to use, because with schizophrenia, Brig has a very difficult time sometimes learning new skills. And so I wanted him to be able to keep the stove and the microwave and, the other appliances that he's familiar with, just for that ease of transition as he's learning how to be independent. And hooking up the new propane stove was a lot harder than we had anticipated, because there were some propane leaks in the line behind the wall, and then we missed a gasket or something coming into the stove. And so what ended up happening was we went through the Christmas holiday without a stove, because getting somebody out to look at it and repair it and figure out what we were not seeing in order to make sure that, our health and wellness was safe and we didn't have a gas leak in the home and so on and so forth, reminded me how grateful I am for the church's teaching on emergency preparedness.
Yeah.
Because of this issue with the stove, it didn't really interfere with our Christmas meal at all. We pulled out we have a backup, basically like a hot plate that is meant to be 2 electric burners meant for a college dorm. We have a little air fryer / oven / rotisserie / whatever, also electric, that sits on the countertop. So, I mean, we made some dinners in some, 2 8x8 pans instead of 1 9x13 pan. And we had to get creative in making sure that we had what we needed. But I look back on our life, and I would say, things like food storage was very beneficial. Now, again, giving that negative side of this, I feel like the church pushed food storage on us more so than they did emergency savings and financial security. It was kind of like get out of debt, avoid debt, and food storage. But they didn't really, I don't feel like the church really pushed savings the way that I would have liked to. So a lot of, when I look back at those times that we had to depend on food storage, if we had actually saved a little more wisely, we would not have needed to fall back and live off of food storage. And so I think that some of the focus and the prioritizing is a little goofy within the church. And so thank you to the Dave Ramsey program and then financial planners to help us get in line with savings. So that way, you know, we weren't like, oh, this is a rough month financially, let's not buy food so we can pay our bills. Rather, hey, let's have some money in the savings account so that way we can just cover everything during those months where, you know, shit hit the fan or the Army decided not to pay us, which for anybody who's served in the military, you know what that's like, where you move and something happens and suddenly your pay is messed up and you just don't get a paycheck for a month or two. It happens. It's a real thing in the military. But I think about the times that, like, we were, I'll say victims. I don't necessarily like the word victim, but I don't have another word, where like the hurricanes came through or the torrential floodings came through in North Carolina. We did 3 floods and 1 tornado during our time living in Fayetteville, North Carolina, at Fort Bragg. Yes, I almost said Fort Bliss. That's El Paso. Fort Bragg. The times that our electricity got knocked out for several days, that we had a generator with extra fuel that we were able to, the electricity. I remember when we were in Killeen, there was something wrong with our duplex, and us and the neighbors. I mean, Jess was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And you and I fired up the generator, and like we ran an extension cord from the duplex next to us. So Jess, they had an extension cord to plug in their refrigerator and freezer, and we plugged in our refrigerator and freezer, and then we cooked on that hot plate or on the barbecue grill or something. We have been very blessed by getting creative in emergency preparedness. Like, we've done a pretty good job our whole lives of having a 72-hour kit. We don't right now. We probably need to get those updated
Sure we
and
do.
whatnot.
There's just diapers in one of the bags still.
Right. Abby, you're 9. You get to wear the clothes that fit you when you were 4
That's right.
in this emergency.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Right. But for those everyday emergencies, like, you know, just over the Christmas holiday, for some reason, the electrical grid got knocked out in a good portion of our community, and we were not worried. We've got a generator to the house. We've got the portable generator. We've got the extra fuel. We've got, you know, cash in the home in case electricity goes out. I remember when we were victims of the forest fire.
Now all you need is our address so you know where to find stuff.
It's not a lot of cash, y'all. We're not, come rob us. You're not getting that much.
No.
But it's enough that if we needed to pay cash because electricity was out and the network was knocked down and you couldn't use a debit card, we have cash. You know, those types of things where it's like, hey, we depend an awful lot on electricity and internet. What are some skills? What are the quote unquote survival skills? And I'm not talking about like living in the forest completely off the grid survival skills, which I would say, Mason, you and I both have those skills because of our Mormon upbringing as well.
Sure.
But just the simple things that happen to everybody. You know, we had an emergency and we're short on funds. Let's get an emergency savings going. Hey, during the toilet paper shortage, I don't think very many Mormons were running short on toilet paper if they had their year's supply during the pandemic here in the United States. You know, I know we didn't because we had a good 6 months to a year's supply of toilet paper in the house. And so I'm very grateful for that, because there have been times like this holiday where our stove got knocked out and we just were able to roll with the punches because we already knew what we needed to do and we had the resources that we needed to not have extra stress.
Yeah.
During that time period.
And it's a big deal for sure.
So.
Yeah.
All right, Mason, what's your number 3?
All
or
right.
I guess our number 6.
By the way, in the Doctrine and Covenants it says, if ye are prepared, ye shall not fear. That's kind of the precedent there for that one.
You know, I think that yes and no. I'm not afraid of a prolonged electrical outage. I am afraid of war. So even though I've got what I need to take care of my family for several months comfortably, that does not mean that my fear of violence and those other things go away.
It's a little simplistic. It's black and white thinking.
Yeah, very black and white thinking.
But the idea being that if you prepare for things that you can anticipate, you won't be afraid when those things come. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so my last one, and then we're going to talk about one that we both had, but mine just comes with just scriptural awareness, just being aware. I was a very good seminary student. I've really, they're kind of childish, but there were some living scriptures, not the videos, but just audio.
The audio book
that we actually had. The tapes for the Old Testament, for the New Testament, for church history, for the Book of Mormon, for American history. And I learned an awful lot from those things. And then from seminary, I still know my scriptures very well, better than most.
Right. We joke that you're the walking quad, because in the Mormon church, you've got Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, and the Bible. And we put them all in one book and call it the quad.
Right.
We used to joke that Mason was a walking quad.
I'm a quad.
You are a hot quad, baby.
But I'm grateful for that. Like, there's been times where I took pride in it, and it wasn't necessarily a healthy thing for me. But mostly now I'm grateful for it. Even as I go through the struggles with religion and God and those kinds of things, it's helpful for me to have a very clear understanding of most of what the scriptures teach about things. It's certainly been helpful in the times where I was able to be influential with other people as a bishop, as a leader in the church, being able to have them, bring things and be able to pull scriptures up right away and say, hey, what about this? And for them to be able to walk away feeling like they'd gotten some good answers for them that really didn't come from me. So that's been very helpful. It's still something that I appreciate, and I imagine will continue to be of value in my life.
Well, and I'm going to say that whether you're still a member or you're an ex-Mormon, whether you believe the Book of Mormon to be the Word of God or a work of fiction, a 19th century work of fiction, and same with the Bible, if you believe the Bible to be the Word of God or mythological stories passed down through time in order to teach valuable lessons, no matter how you look at the scriptures, there is spiritual value there.
Right.
I mean, you can find little nuggets of wisdom in most sources. And so I think having that understanding, especially in our society today, where, in the United States, most of us come from some sort of Christian value system, to understand where those values came from, even though some of the stories are a little from the Bible, that's a good place to start. I would also say, Mason, one of the things that I saw is your ability to memorize and find the resource very quickly helped you quite a bit in medical school. You led a very large study group during anesthesia school, and your ability to recall that type of information served you very well, especially since we adopted Abby in the middle of anesthesia school, which meant, because Abby was born addicted to drugs, she had very low muscle tone and a very weak suck, and she was premature. We were feeding her every 2 hours from the start of one feed to the start of the next feed for the first 6 weeks of her life. We were giving her like 1 to 2 ounces every 2 hours because that's all she could handle. And you and I took that in shifts, and your ability to memorize, know where the resources was, be able to find that information, which I think came from your love of scripture mastery and studying the scriptures. It served you very well in study skills and information retention in lots of other areas of your life.
Yeah, I'm sure that I have that innate ability, but it really was manifest in my study of the scriptures, and therefore became an incredible talent going through school and things like that. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those, it may be an innate characteristic that you were able to develop more fully because of the emphasis the Mormon Church puts on knowing scriptures.
Yeah, I can't think of any other organization, even in school, where you're asked to memorize facts or verses the same way that you are in Mormonism. Not even in Christian churches as much.
Right.
I mean, in Mormonism, in order to quote unquote, letter in seminary, you have to memorize 25 passages of scripture. And sometimes they're small, sometimes they're quite large. One of them in the Doctrine and Covenants is like 16 verses. So it's not a small feat to do that. And I memorized a lot of those. I certainly didn't memorize all 100 of them, but I memorized a lot of those and still could give you a basic rendering of a lot of those. Right. Now,
this is back when you could letter in seminary, y'all. I don't think lettering in seminary is a thing anymore, but maybe it is.
I don't know. But yes, I can't think of another organization that really requires you to memorize things quite as much of that as that.
I'm sure they're out there,
not as a kid,
but they're not the norm. For sure.
Well, not as a young man. Norm. Like I memorized a lot of stuff in medicine, and I'm sure you've memorized stuff for what you do, and lots of people memorize things as an adult for a profession.
Right. I don't have a lot of rote memorization or the attention to detail memorization that you do for anesthesia. I don't dose medications to the point of bringing somebody to the brink of death and then back alive again. That's not my skill set. I'm you know what? My inability to do equations quickly in my head is the main reason I'm probably not. Well, that and the stinky smells that you find in a hospital, those are the two main reasons I'm not a nurse or a doctor or a physical therapist or something. I love the medical field. Y'all, I got limits on that. I will do behavioral health every day of the week. But yeah, no, I did not have to memorize information the way that you did for medical school, not at all. I became very, very familiar with reading research and identifying it and utilizing it and putting it into practice, or putting theory into practice. Yeah. That's kind of where my skill set was for me. But.
Yeah, well, and the precedent on this one, there's lots of verses that talk about studying the scriptures or memorizing them, or there's the experience just to keep with the New Testament. There's the experience of when Satan came and tempted Jesus, he answered him with scripture. Obviously, he didn't have the scriptures with him. He knew those things. He'd memorized them. And so a benefit to us in general. So the last one.
And I would say, moving forward, even though we were having a discussion today with our kids' trumpet teacher, and there was a joke, "Get thee behind me, pencil." Oh, yeah. And that came from scripture. But there have been times still where you have found a great deal of peace. And even I found a great deal of peace from a scripture, and I'm like, I think that comes from the Book of Mormon. And it really still, there's still some spiritual significance for me there as I'm connecting with people. So even though Sarah Westbrook believes that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century work of fiction from Joseph Smith, I can still honor that some of those stories can be inspiring and increase my spirituality as an individual.
Right. Well, and I don't think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that your main issue with the Book of Mormon is what's actually in the Book of Mormon. There's been a lot of peace that comes from what's in there, and a lot of people feel that way. Your issue is really more with you believe it was a creation of Joseph Smith, and no one wants to acknowledge in church leadership that that's a possibility even, let alone a reality.
My issue surrounding the Book of Mormon is the blatant dishonesty at the hands of the leadership.
Right. It's not what's on the pages. There's still a lot of comfort and peace that is available to people from what's on the pages. Right. So, yeah. So the last one we want to talk about was really just community. You and I both wrote that down. The friend that I talked to said, my wife, laugh out loud when I said, what did you get from the church? And I wanted his perspective and her perspective because he actually joined the church when he was in high school and has now left, and she grew up in the church. And so, of course, different perspectives there. He had a much easier time leaving the church because he had joined the church. Right. It was a change at the time.
He wasn't entrenched in it in the same way that somebody
none of his
who
family.
Had... Right.
None of his family are members of the church, so he didn't face. Of course, his in-laws are, and so there was some struggle there. But his immediate family. They weren't members of the church. There wasn't the same drawbacks that come. But as we've talked about that, we went through 20 years in the military. We moved so many times.
Right.
On an average of probably once every year or two.
In the beginning, yeah. I would say on average we moved every 3 years. But during the first, we did 3 different places. 1, 2, 3. Yeah,
right, but in El Paso, we lived in 3 different homes.
Oh, yeah.
And then we spent 3 years in Fort Bragg and then left and then went back to Fort Bragg. So we moved a lot. And of course, one of the things that some people complain about is, we got to find a new church. We got to find a new community. And the Army provides a lot of that because there's a built-in community just being in an Army community. But one of the things that was so easy for us was we just looked up where the local church was. Right. And we went. And almost always...
We put in our address and there's our community.
Almost always, that was a good thing. There were a couple of times, a couple of wards where we really struggled.
Our second ward in El Paso was very, very difficult for us, for sure. But for the most part, other than that, we had that built-in community. And I would say, that was kind of like a double whammy. We had the military community and then the Mormon community. Yep. And then we had the Mormon military community. And if you want to know who does community well, it's the Mormon military community. They got that double skill going on. And I miss that. I don't feel like we have that. Again, though, there's that double-edged sword of if you don't align your belief system and values within the Mormon community, you get ostracized from it. And I don't think they mean to. They like to, that lip service of we want to welcome you back and come back. But the actuality of how that plays out, it's very cold. Like it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel inviting anymore. Yeah. And so one of the challenges with that community is, Mormons do community well. And one of the things that I see is ex-Mormons are doing the community well. Like I feel very comfortable within my ex-Mormon community now. And a lot of that is because we've done community well.
Right. We've learned community, and the church definitely helps us learn community. Like you said, it's a double-edged sword. There's some bad things that come from that too. But we learned community. I mean, the church is all about activities and getting groups together and people together, and it does that very well. And so definitely one of the things that we learned and benefited from and loved about the church.
And one of the hardest things to lose
as that's part of that double-edged sword
from the church is that the community is amazing when you fit in.
Right.
But when you don't. So I'm going to say it's a cliquish community. Maybe we need to work on that, Mormons. But they do community and taking care of each other very well. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And a benefit that I will appreciate forever. It's been very difficult to find community without that built-in community. And again, part of the double-edged sword, we haven't had to really learn how to gain a community because it's always been right there for us.
Do you feel that way for you? Because I don't feel that way. From the time I was very young, my closest friends have not been Mormon. And so I think I've developed a little bit differently. And I think a lot of that has to do with having parents that grew up. Like, my mom was a military brat. And my dad grew up in the Los Angeles area. And so for me, my youth growing up, I did not learn to depend only on Mormonism for a community. And so I don't feel like I lost as much community, I think, as you during this shift.
I might actually have to recant that too. I've learned how to build community in a lot of different ways, but a lot of that has been the church. A lot of that was the military, both built-in communities. So I don't think that I really learned how to build my own community because I never had to. It was never necessary for me to do that until now. And so there's still some friends from the military. There's still some friends from our church community here, but it's been very sparse. And some of that we did on purpose. We chose to live a little bit further away from the military community because Our kids were tired of their friends leaving every
Right. They needed
few months.
stability.
We wanted that stability for them, and I'm grateful for that, but it's made it difficult now that my church community is a little bit not as...
They're hesitant with you now because of me.
They're hesitant now, and I'm not close to my military community. It's been difficult.
Well, and throw in COVID that, really stopped a lot of that. I would say now that things are recovering from COVID and whatnot, you're definitely engaging in rebuilding that. But yes, there was definitely a loss there. And when I left, all of our children felt it. It was, we became the project. Our kids did not like being the Mormon church's project. And then the other thing of, we can't go to your house anymore because...
I think that's
been very difficult.
I think that is the main reason that our children are not actively seeking to attend the Mormon church anymore, because they felt so acutely the change when you left that, and they didn't like it.
Right. Well, because I didn't change who I was. Like, my values, your kids would still be just as safe in my home today as they were when I was a Mormon. And I'm not going to be talking to somebody else's kids about religion, whatever.
We're
I've got
not on a mission to do that. We wouldn't have done that before. Like, we wouldn't have preached to them about the church when they came.
Right.
We had lots of non-member kids that were friends with our kids, and we didn't ever talk church with them.
Right. Well, and I remember
nothing really changed.
I remember taking care of somebody's kiddo for a prolonged period of time. They had something going on, and I spoke to them. I was like, "Hey, we normally do family home evening. Are you okay if your kiddo joins us, or we can skip it this week?" And they were like, "Oh no, you're just fine. I trust you," whatever. And we did that lesson. Instead of delving into like Mormon scripture, we did a value lesson, something about like being honest and not getting tangled up in lies. Or we did a generic, if we knew they were Christian and we were Christian and we had non-members over for family home evening, we would teach from the Bible. I'm going to honor somebody else's spiritual stuff. But it was very interesting when I left the church, that major shift of Sarah's no longer a safe place for our kids to be, that's the first time I've ever had people question whether or not their kids are safe in my home. Yeah. Because our home has, from the beginning of us being parents, our home has been where the neighborhood kids have flocked to, and they still do. I mean, we still have the neighborhood kids. I only had the neighborhood kid over this morning. They still flock to our home, but it's been a very interesting shift to see the Mormon neighborhood kids no longer do. And I'm talking about like in our community. And before I left the church, the parents from that community were dropping their kids off quite regularly, and then it just stopped. And our kids were like, wow, because you're ostracizing, you're supposed to go after the 90 and 9, you're supposed to love without judgment. And so their experiential, what's the word? My brain just went blank. Their experiences the church says or teaches one thing and then does another, has made it so that, none of our kids are really interested in participating anymore because of how different our family has been treated.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons that we wanted to share here today is that there is a lot of good that comes from the church. Ironically, a lot of the bad comes from some of the same things.
Which is normal.
And I think
it's important to see both sides of the coin. It's a whole coin. I'll shut up. Sorry, go. You're supposed to throw chocolate at me. Yeah,
I can't. I'm not doing that.
Okay, sorry.
I want people to recognize that kind of thing happens on lots of different levels. And obviously you want the same thing. We want to see the good and bad that comes from things so that we can find a place where we can happily partake of the good without passing on the bad. We might not be able to avoid all the bad because not everybody's doing the same thing. But I can, if I choose to stay in the church, I can benefit from the good things and recognize where the bad things are so that I'm not passing them on to someone else. And I think that's why this is so helpful. And then go.
I was going to say, two sides, same coin has value. I don't think, if I take a quarter and one side of it's dirty, we can look at that back side of the quarter and be like, oh, that's dirty. Maybe we need to plop it in a bowl of vinegar or wash it off or something.
Quarter hasn't lost its value in this case.
I think one of the challenges within Mormonism is it's very difficult for the leadership, and I'm talking about the high up leadership, to really talk about some of the bad things or where these great skills that they're teaching have their limits because they're not willing to talk about them and address them head on.
Yes.
The church has really developed a really toxic culture that is very difficult for those who don't fall in line to remain a part of that community. We learn best by being able to talk about our limitations. And so I think that, there's a lot of good things. And one of the things we demonstrated today is every single one of our good things, we were like, and this is the ugly side of that coin.
Yeah.
If we can address the ugly, we have the power to course correct and change it. Not that it'll ever be a perfect organization. It won't be. No organization
and
will
we're
ever
not looking
be perfect.
for it to be.
We have humans in it, and humans are, historically
and the leaders
bad,
are human.
horrible. We've all done horrible things.
Right. We're not expecting the
humans.
leadership to be perfect either.
Right. But as we can learn to value the good while still talking about and owning the bad, we really have the most power to change, to have that positive social change and become something better and learn and grow and do things differently in a way that helps more people.
Yeah.
So
thanks for being here with us on this journey and allowing us to kind of share those good things and some of the bad things, and just recognizing that it's a lot for us sometimes, because some of the bad things are really bad for us. Some of the good things are really good for us, and it really just depends on your experience. But if we can learn to see other people's experiences, that's really what helps. The scriptures are great for me. They might be a little bit hard on a lot of people, and I need to be able to see that.
Well, and I would say, Mason, you say a lot of things are really good and a lot of things are really bad. Well, let's challenge that polarized thinking. Almost everything is somewhere in between.
Yeah. I think what I meant by that, I didn't want to polarize it. What I meant is that some people will see something as a really good thing in their lives, but other people will see that same thing as a negative thing in their life. And what we have to be able to do is expand our perspectives and recognize, you know what, this is a really good thing for me, but I can see why it's not a good thing for this person, and open up our ability to recognize that things are different. Everybody's experience is different, and everybody's experience is important and impactful in their life.
Well, and I'll end with this analogy that I use a lot in clinic, and that is, with photography and the art of photography, we have these lovely things. We can zoom in, and we can even zoom in on the microscopic, like itty bitty pieces of atoms and discover absolute beauty. But we also need to zoom out and see the big picture and how those little itty bitty things affect the great big picture. And so the beauty of life is occasionally zooming in, occasionally zooming out, and being somewhere in between all the time on what we're seeing and understanding it from multiple different perspectives in order to truly appreciate the beauty that's there and also learn how to do things differently and become better. So thanks again so much for being with us today. We cannot wait to see you next time.
Love you guys.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life.
Is yours effective?
You're disgusting. Hello. Welcome back. Oh my gosh, my voice. Okay.
You sound funny.
I do sound funny. I'm going to warn everyone.